There are two subjects that I don't like to ever get involved in, and that happens to be entertainment and sports. Black folks don't handle those subjects very well. But when you have people who are trying to hold up black figures from the music world and from the athletics world as being proxies for the black community, and they're going to demonize the black community by proxy, I gotta say something. Let's talk about Kyrie Irving. Let's talk about this lie we've been hearing for the last few weeks that the black community is anti-Semitic. So what is Kyrie Irving even getting dragged for? What did he do? I've looked to see what comments or what actions he's allegedly committed, and I found nothing. And yet you got people going into phony hysterics about him, that allegedly he is the poster child for anti-Semitism in the black community. He's the proof of anti-Semitism in the black community. And what exactly is the evidence of Kyrie Irving being anti-Semitic? He's being condemned for not saying something. He's not being attacked for what he said. He's being attacked for what he didn't say. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the classic story, A Man for All Seasons. Now, that tale is based on the real-life events of Sir Thomas More. More was a highly respected English statesman. At the time, England was a Catholic country, but their reprobate king, Henry VIII, wanted to annul his marriage to his Spanish wife. So there was a lot of pressure being put on Thomas More to join the king in demanding that the Pope annul the marriage, so the king could go chase some more skirts. Sir Thomas More refused. He would eventually be executed for that refusal. But do you know why Thomas More was executed? Do you know what the argument was that they used to have him put to death? The king's henchmen, like Lord Cromwell, demanded that More say that the king has the right to divorce his wife, and More said nothing. He didn't say the king had no right to divorce his wife. He simply refused to say that the king did. He claimed neutrality. Men like Lord Cromwell interrogated More repeatedly, accusing him of treason to the king. Cromwell tried every rhetorical trick in the book to convince everyone that More's silence meant that he was defying the king, that he was opposing what the king wanted to do. More, however, brought up the fact that under British law, qui tacit consenteret, that silence gives consent. And More was right. People usually only speak up on things that they object to, especially if it affects them personally. When people remain silent, their silence equals agreement. Silence means that they agree with, or at the very least, they're not going to oppose whatever is going on. And we saw this play itself out with LeBron James. So long as LeBron said nothing about Black Lives Matter, the white media, especially the racist trash at False News like Laura Ingraham, didn't have anything bad to say about him. When he finally, however, wore some apparel supporting the movement, those same people whined that he and the rest of the NBA need to stay out of politics and just shut up and dribble. And then came the protest by groups in Hong Kong who were defying the Chinese Communist government. By the way, those protests in Hong Kong were being largely supported by the US government. And then those same hardheads from False News suddenly wanted everyone to become an activist, especially the NBA. They said the NBA is being un-American, they're being undemocratic, they're not going to refuse to play in China. Suddenly they were attacking LeBron James for not being involved in politics. All of a sudden, his silence was no longer him staying in his lane. It was no longer permissible for him to just shut up and dribble. His silence was a pro-communist China statement now. Of course, that's not true at all. Those are just the voices in Laura Ingraham's empty head, but it just goes to show the dynamic that's at work here. Because this is the exact same thing being done with Kyrie Irving. He's being attacked, demonized, and vilified in the white media, not because he said that he's in favor of something, not because he said that he opposes something. He's being dragged because he refuses to say anything. But they claim his silence means that he's anti-Semitic, even though they asked him about the movie, and he didn't say anything about the movie either. So which one is it? Are we to take his silence to mean that he doesn't like Jewish people, or that he doesn't like the movie because he's been silent on both? And both of those statements cannot be true. There is not and has never been an anti-Semitic anything in the black community. For example, Walter White, leader of the NAACP, went to the UN and personally lobbied Ethiopia, Haiti, and Liberia to support the establishment of the State of Israel. Walter White, a black man representing an ostensibly black organization. And before there was a State of Israel, you had Walter White out there advocating for it. He was speaking louder than practically most of the Jewish population in the United States. Ralph Bunche became the first non-white person to be awarded the Nobel Prize due to his helping negotiate an end to the 1948-1949 war between Israel and the Arabs. So you had one black man who led the effort to establish the state of Israel and another black man who helped to ensure that Israel wasn't wiped out the moment that it was created. Gee, is this the black anti-Semitism that Goldie Taylor and the white media that put her up to it keep telling us about? At a time when black people were being lynched in the streets, our churches firebombed, attack dogs and fire hoses turned on us, at that same time, black leaders were fighting for the establishment of the state of Israel. This trope that black people are anti-Semitic is a feeble lie, and the people who keep trying to push it, they know that what they're saying isn't true, but someone seems to think that this lie serves a certain purpose, that it's useful. And this trope is quite old. Hollywood was busy laying the groundwork for it almost 60 years ago. In 1964, the renowned director Sidney Lumet made a movie called The Pawnbroker. It starred Rod Steiger. You'll remember Steiger as having played Marlon Brando's brother in the movie On the Waterfront. He also played the racist police chief in The Heat of the Night. In The Pawnbroker, Steiger plays a Holocaust survivor who, after the war, settles in the United States in East Harlem, New York. You can probably already tell where this one's going. Steiger's character has nothing but disdain for his neighbors and even his own patrons, and while defenders of the film will point out that he is a curmudgeon who is spiteful of everyone due to his Holocaust experience, the movie makes it a point to show practically all the black characters in a negative light. The movie has Brock Peters playing a character named Rodriguez, who uses the pawn shop as a front for his racketeering. And the movie's climax has a gang of thieves led by a black man who come to rob Steiger's store. The theft results in Steiger's white Hispanic assistant being killed in the process. I won't say the movie was dripping with anti-black racism from first frame to ending credits, but the filmmakers made it crystal clear that black people hadn't done this Jewish pawn shop owner any favors. Black people were presented in this movie as being uniquely antagonistic towards this grumpy but otherwise harmless Jewish merchant. Now, this was back in 1964. You did not have any examples of any antagonism or conflict towards Jewish Americans by African Americans at all. This movie was a work of fiction right up there with sci-fi. Black people are not anti-Semitic and cannot be because racism requires power, and black people have no power in this society. We don't have the power to attack anyone else. We don't even have the power to defend ourselves. What's happening to Kyrie Irving right now is happening regardless of what the black community says on any front. Black people do not have the power to do to anyone else what's being done to Kyrie Irving. Here's two examples, Don Imus and Donald Sterling, both white men who were caught out making racist remarks about black people. Now, what black person had the power to punish either one of them? Not a one. What black person had the power to take their money away from them? Not even one. What group of black businesses and corporations ganged up on these guys and said, we're going to run you out of town and we're going to make your names mud? None, because there's none who had the power to. When calls came for Imus to be suspended, if not fired, black people had to go to the owners and operators of the white media, and in the case of Donald Sterling, the almost exclusively white owners and management of the NBA. Black folks had to go to these non-black entities, hat in hand, begging them to do something about their respective races. Black people were completely unable to do anything about either one of them. Now compare that, on the other hand, to Kanye West and Kyrie Irving. Both of them are being accused of anti-Semitism, and in the case of Kyrie Irving being accused of anti-Semitism for having not said anything at all, for having not done anything. Is there any Jewish American who had to go to the black community to take Kanye West's music deals from him? What black person did the Jewish community have to go through in order to get his clothing deals taken from him? Did Ari Emanuel, whose brother Rahm Emanuel presided over the cover-up of the Laquan McDonald murder, did he have to go to even one black person to get Kanye's finances thrown into chaos? Same thing goes with Kyrie Irving. When these empty accusations of anti-Semitism were leveled against him, there was no black person who the Jewish community had to go to in order to get something to be done about him. It was done regardless. Black people didn't have the power to prevent Kanye or Kyrie from being piled on or to stop the white powers that be from doing whatever they wanted against them. Kanye said something that offended many in the Jewish community, and they had the power to punish him themselves. Kyrie didn't even say anything, didn't do anything. He merely retweeted a documentary or movie or whatever that had content that certain people took offense at. Kyrie Irving didn't direct that movie, didn't write it, didn't fund it, didn't produce it, didn't even tell Amazon to put it on their website. He merely put out a tweet pointing to it. And then all this largely phony outrage took place with the NBA commissioner in the end having to admit what we've known all along. Kyrie Irving is not anti-Semitic. But even the NBA's own Jewish commissioner admitting that Kyrie Irving is not anti-Semitic isn't going to stop this train, because it's not about anti-Semitism, it's about demonizing black people. So now there's a follow-up campaign saying we need to get that movie purged from Amazon.com because it's hateful and blah, blah, blah. Well, in that case, then, we need to remove all such movies like that, don't we? None of these people are going into hysterics about The Jazz Singer. That movie, of course, starred the infamous Al Jolson, whose name has become synonymous with blackface. In the movie, Jolson portrays a Jewish entertainer who runs around doing a blackface routine. And by the way, The Jazz Singer was put into the Library of Congress by the National Film Registry, which means the nation's taxes will go to preserve one of the most anti-black racist films of all time, and the American Film Institute ranked it among the best American films of all time. But here's my question. Why is it that a movie that nobody even heard of before Kyrie Irving merely retweeted it one time is seen as the sum of all evil? Meanwhile, a putridly, blatantly, infamously racist movie like The Jazz Singer is not being held in the same contempt, not being attacked. The Jazz Singer is on Amazon. And no one's objecting to that. Well, at least no one who's black anyway. No one's calling out this blatant pile of anti-black racism. In fact, it's only praised and lauded by people who love it precisely because it's a blatant pile of anti-black racism. They don't care about that reeking pile of celluloid. They only pretend to like it for the same reason all these racists pretended to support George Zimmerman and Kyle Rittenhouse, because they understood that their support was an anti-black message. And I think that someone ought to be asking just how many of those team owners in the NBA have watched things like Song of the South, Birth of a Nation, The Jazz Singer. How many of those NBA owners consider those racist works to be American classics? Now, the people who retweet and support that crap like The Jazz Singer and who praise it, they're not punished at all. Nothing happens to them. You would think that the Anti-Defamation League and the Ari Emanuels would be horrified that a movie like The Jazz Singer, which is only known for depicting a Jewish character running around in blackface, well, you think they'd be raising hell about it. None of them are demanding that Amazon take it off their website. None of them are demanding to know who put this garbage in the National Film Registry. None of them are demanding to know who at the American Film Institute thought so highly of this filth. Maybe we'd see Ari Emanuel's name, perhaps, if we started asking who elevated The Jazz Singer to such heights. Who was it who decided that it was worthy of all of this praise and awards and honors? If we asked who at the American Film Institute thought so highly of this garbage, maybe perhaps Ari Emanuel's name might come up. God knows he's been in the entertainment business long enough. The Jazz Singer is a racist delight, and there's more than a few racists out there who are supporting it openly and behind the scenes. No one's trying to get The Jazz Singer removed from Amazon or demonize the people who like it, because this isn't about fighting bigotry. It never was. It's about the thing it's always been about. The predictable drumbeat of claiming that black people are the real racists. Because once you say that, why, you can also say that black people can be mistreated with impunity, because, after all, black people are no better than the very racists who are attacking them, right? Last year, the trope was black people are responsible for attacking every Asian person in America. This year, it's all of black America is anti-Semitic. Next year, it'll be something else. Because this is political. It's about attacking the black community by proxy. Me Too went from being about Harvey Weinstein, Matt Lauer, Les Moonves, and Charlie Rose to somehow being about Bill Cosby. Except nobody held Weinstein up as an example of something wrong with his religion. Bill Cosby, on the other hand, was immediately linked to the black community as a whole. All of the racist tropes that these white supremacists in the media normally couldn't get away with saying, now they were openly using them. But of course, pretending as if it's only because of Cosby and other men like him why a conversation has started about the black community. And when it seemed that there was too much pushback from the grassroots against that trope and that pack of lies, the white media then put their asinine stooge, Kamau Dumbbell, out front to just blatantly say that black men are all a bunch of rape-happy monsters jumping on any female we can get our hands on, and why we need to talk about black rape culture. No matter how many white men in the media have been exposed as sexual predators, you never see anyone trying to say the white community should be racially pathologized, that their behavior somehow is emblematic of their entire group. No matter how many white men have attacked Asians, even a mass shooter, that doesn't get racially pathologized either. You didn't see Juju Chang doing any pieces on Nightline, having anyone saying the white community needs to realize they're killing Asians, they're harming Asian people. They wouldn't dare do that. The vast majority of attacks against Asians haven't been committed by black people, and the vast majority of accusations in the Me Too era haven't been against black men in the media either. But the white media predictably won't cover any of that. Just in the last few days, Paul Haggis, the Oscar-winning screenwriter of Crash and $1 Million Baby, among other dreck, was found liable in a civil trial for 3 counts of rape, and he's looking at a minimum of $7 million that he's going to have to shell out. Now, where's the white media frenzy about that? I'm not talking about a couple of hoots and hollers, some coverage here and there. I mean, where's the Cosby treatment for that? Because the white media had no problem going into phony hysterics about Z-list nobodies like Jussie Smollett merely over a false police report when nobody was hurt or even inconvenienced. So certainly an A-list screenwriter who raped a woman should be more newsworthy, right? Wrong. Nobody in the white media has been running up and shoving microphones in the faces of all the actors who have been in the movies that Paul Haggis wrote. Actors like Clint Eastwood, Hilary Swank, Matt Dillon, Tony Danza, etc. Nobody from the white media has been telling them to condemn Paul Haggis publicly. But of course, they didn't do that with Kevin Spacey either. By the way, Kevin Spacey's already planning his comeback. The white media is not making sure to show everyone who's ever worked with Paul Haggis or ever known him, calling him a monster, or saying, "Oh, I just can't defend him." They're not trying to make him out to be a pariah at all. This is social engineering. With someone like Harvey Weinstein, when it blows up that big in their faces, well, that gets beyond their control, but that's okay. They do counter-programming. They make sure that if you do one story about Harvey Weinstein, there's going to be 4 or 5 about Bill Cosby, then there's going to be another one about R. Kelly, then there's going to be another one about Michael Jackson, and then they'll just start throwing in black men's names simply because they've been accused with absolutely nothing whatsoever, just to make sure, see, there's one white guy we talked about over here, but there's 5 black guys over here. That's how you shape the social consciousness, by conditioning the society that whenever a black man is accused of anything, no matter how weak the evidence, even if the evidence doesn't exist, he's still guilty. If he's not guilty of the particular crime he's being accused of, well, he's black, so he's guilty of something. So go ahead and lock him up, or destroy his reputation, it's okay. He's black. That's the crime. Society is conditioned that even when they accuse a black man of something, you're supposed to denounce him without checking to see if the accusations are even real. But when the accused is not black, say if you got some racist white cop like Derek Chauvin or whomever who kills a black person in cold blood on video, well, you automatically give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, you can't jump to conclusions. Any sort of analyses or any sort of observation is a rush to judgment. What about their day in court? What about their due process? Innocent until proven guilty, we are told that relentlessly. No matter how damning the evidence, no matter how overwhelming, it's always, well, you gotta wait and see. Tom Brokaw was accused of sexual misconduct, and all the women at MSNBC, including Rachel Maddow, came to his defense. And nobody demonized them or shamed them or attacked them or said, how could they do that? Les Moonves is gone from CBS. But even after it's been shown that the LAPD worked hand in hand with Moonves to cover up his crimes, nobody at that network will call out his record of victims, and nobody at these other white media networks will do it either. And why would they? Doesn't matter if it's Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly at Fox, or Don Hewitt and Les Moonves at CBS, or Matt Lauer and Mark Halperin at NBC. They're all doing the same thing. So they all understand that as long as they don't target each other, none of them will have to face any serious consequences. They just work together instead to push a collective narrative that scapegoats black men. And that's what they've systematically done. The white media is a mutual protection racket. And there's nothing new about this racial privilege. Roman Polanski was guilty of violating a child. He fled the United States to escape prison, and not only has he still kept making movies without missing a beat, but to this day you have big stars like Adrian Brody, Ewan McGregor, and Pierce Brosnan who have been in his movies, as if they didn't know that this guy had raped a child. I had told you the other day about this Nigerian scammer who was brought back to the U.S. and given 10 years in prison. He had fled to Dubai because the United Arab Emirates doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. And I guess this Nigerian scammer doesn't read so well. God knows there's scam emails to prove of that. He didn't seem to understand that an extradition treaty simply means that there's no legal obligation to hand someone over. It doesn't mean that the government in question can't hand you over. And as that scammer found out, it wasn't the U.S. Marshals who came to get him. It was the Dubai police themselves who slapped him in handcuffs and put him on the first thing smoking to the U.S. His would-be protectors, they were the ones who gave him up. And it didn't take years and years of begging and pleading by the U.S. government. It didn't take years and years of behind-the-scenes negotiations. All it took was one phone call, and they snatched him up and threw him out. Now, compare that, on the other hand, to Julian Assange. He tried to hide in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, but the ruling party in Ecuador lost their election, and the new Ecuadorian government was aligned with the U.S., so they let the London police haul Assange away. That was in 2019. It's been 3 years since then, and Assange still hasn't been extradited back to the U.S., this despite every court in Britain that he's filed suit in, including the British Supreme Court, saying that he should be extradited. My point is that it's Roman Polanski's skin color that protects him. But we also know that the ties between the white media, which includes Hollywood, and the government are incestuous. Sexual predators run in packs. It's no coincidence that Jeffrey Epstein had politicians and Hollywood figures on his Lolita Express jet. The U.S. government can get Polanski back. The only question is, does he know things that would be dangerous to a lot of men in power? And why is it that it took an independent documentary about Polanski to reignite interest in him? Why wasn't it CNN who made that documentary, or Showtime, or HBO? They've got plenty of time to make up lies about Michael Jackson, or to obsess over R. Kelly, or to push total lies about Bill Cosby. But these same white media outlets conveniently have no interest in the most notorious sexual predator to ever come out of Tinseltown. Someone who we already knew was guilty of what he was accused of, no question. But Ari Emanuel's not outraged, and apparently neither is anyone else in the white media. The fact that Roman Polanski violated a child didn't stop him from being awarded the Palme d'Or at Cannes, or an Oscar award the very next year. Polanski got that Oscar over 20 years after he fled the U.S., and yet you had all these stars and all of these Hollywood bigwigs in front of the world, in front of a global televised audience applauding him, even though everyone knew why he couldn't be there to accept his award. But nobody was willing to bring that up. Nobody was willing to mention how wrong it was to consider him for an Oscar, much less give him that award considering what he's done. And that was back in 2003. If anything should have ignited interest in dragging him back to the U.S., that should have. But instead, everyone, including the white government, played right along with, well, if he's being given an Oscar, he must not be so bad. Everyone applauding and smiling and acting as if giving a man who raped a child an award wasn't wrong. Since then, we found out that the very men who gave Polanski his Oscar have been engaged in the same kind of depravity that he was. It's been confirmed repeatedly that Hollywood has been ground zero for sexual assaults. But this is how the white media manipulates and changes the social discourse to keep it away from subjects that they don't want to talk about, and to focus all the attention on things that they do want you to look at, regardless of how fraudulent it is. This idea of black anti-Semitism, that talking point is a total lie. Goldie Taylor can shut up. If you practice anti-Semitism, you're going to be called out. You'll lose money and be punished. If you practice anti-Semitism, something's going to be done about it. Anti-black racism is the real problem, because this society makes icons and stars out of anti-black racists. You go ahead and you call yourself attacking black people, you're going to be given honors and praise. You'll be defended, held up as a champion of the First Amendment. Because apparently that's what the First Amendment's about. What it means is you can attack black people and the society is supposed to praise you for it. And many of the same people trying to make something out of nothing with Kyrie Irving are the same people who will praise garbage like Birth of a Nation and The Jazz Singer. You practice anti-black racism, and that's your ticket to ride. The United States is a country created for one purpose, to promote and maintain white supremacy. And white supremacy is not based on anti-Hispanic racism. It's not based on anti-Asian racism. It's not based on antisemitism. White supremacy is based on one thing and one thing only, because there's only one form of racism and one form only: anti-black racism. Anything else is merely bigotry. What's the difference, you ask? Racism is a group sport. It's engaged in at all levels of the society, and it permeates every arena of human activity. Black people do not control the courts. We don't control the media. We don't control industry. So how are black people supposed to mistreat anyone? How are black people supposed to engage in anti-Semitism? The second that a black person says anything that anyone even remotely says is anti-Semitic, that black person is getting dragged. You see, the biggest racket in America is anti-black racism. You can become rich, famous, and powerful off of it. It's only in recent years that occasionally people have been able to aggregate enough attention online to call out this vile behavior, but no one gets punished for it. Not substantively. That's because, unlike with anti-Semitism, the victims of anti-black racism don't have the power to punish those who practice it. And that's the conversation we need to be having, but aren't. It's very easy to drag black people in for abuse because there's no one to stop it. It's very cowardly to attack the most powerless people in the society. There's nothing heroic about going after Kyrie Irving and the so-called requirements that the NBA team he's on is demanding that he fulfill. It's condescending and insulting, and it's meant to be. This isn't about clearing the air. It's about holding up a black man as a figure of scorn and contempt, and then calling themselves scolding him like a child and demanding that he flagellate himself publicly and say, "I am just so unworthy." This after even the Jewish commissioner of the NBA says this man's not an anti-Semite. None of the black players in the NBA are anti-Semitic. The league commissioner is Jewish, so is his predecessor. Many of the team owners are Jewish. Do you see even one of the black players in the NBA saying, "I'm not going to play for a Jewish franchise owner"? Have you seen that almost entirely black players union in the NBA say that they don't want a Jewish man as league commissioner? Have you seen them even say anything remotely anti-Semitic? Hundreds of black men are in the NBA, and not one of them, not even one, has said a single syllable against anyone Jewish. Kyrie Irving didn't say a word or do a thing to anyone. What is he even getting dragged for? If any of the lies about Kyrie Irving were true, then shouldn't we be seeing a tsunami of other NBA players who we're finding have been trading in anti-Semitic sentiment? That ought to be an easy one. The NBA players are all over social media all day. They are the most accessible athletes on earth. And yet the only alleged example of anti-Semitism that's been brought forward is someone who posted an Amazon link. That's a lie, plain and simple. No black man in the NBA has done anything anti-Semitic. They work with and work for Jewish people all day, every day, and haven't said even one remark against them. Now, there have been some NBA franchise owners who have said anti-black racist things. Donald Sterling comes to mind. Now, black men did absolutely nothing to this man other than to make him wealthy. They haven't said a single syllable against him. If anyone has nothing to complain about, it was Donald Sterling, and yet he was proven to be as putridly racist as any member of the KKK. The black community of the United States have created the most accepting and nurturing environment for Jewish people that you'll find outside of Israel. That's not hyperbole. It's a fact. The laws that we fought for cover everyone, including the Jewish community. Everyone's benefited from it, including the Jewish community. There is no other group, no other industry, no other community who has been more accepting of the Jewish people than the African American community of the United States. And there's no group of black men that you can point to who has been more supportive of or more charitable towards the Jewish community than the black men in the NBA. Look at the history of Hollywood and what the white supremacists there did against Jewish Americans. If you want proof of that, just look up the Hays Production Code. Look up why the Hays Production Code had to be enacted. Look where it came from. Those black men in the NBA, many of them already have FU money, as they call it. But you'll notice that not one of them has been showing an FU attitude toward any of the Jewish people who work in the NBA. These black men are free to say whatever they want. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was the first Muslim ball player that people took notice of, but he wasn't the last. So where is this hotbed of anti-Semitism in the NBA at? It ought to be very easy to find. We ought to be seeing that there's just this floodgate of previously unmentioned tweets and letters and phone calls and statements. We ought to be seeing just anti-Semitism wall to wall. So, well, it's been going on, but people just haven't been calling it out. But instead, Kyrie Irving is the one lone alleged example. And what is their example? Well, he didn't say something. 75 years the NBA has been around. The league has over 450 active players this year alone, and in 3/4 of a century, the closest thing that they can try to claim as anti-Semitism from the black men in the NBA is someone's Amazon link. And this is what people like Ari Emanuel and Goldie Taylor point to as proof that the black community is anti-Semitic. To show you what a fraud that talking point is, for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and say that Ari Emanuel's lies are to be believed. That one guy out of 450 plus players in the NBA, that one black man, and that one example, you can't point to anything else about Kyrie Irving that you can call anti-Semitic, but that one thing, that one example from that one individual, that is the proof that the entire black community is anti-Semitic. One solitary Twitter tweet that this man did not even say anything about, doesn't use any slurs, didn't even say, this will tell you the truth about the Jews or whatever. You point to that one thing about one individual and say, this is the proof that we can extrapolate about the entire black community. No, it sounds more like someone sees the black community as just one big nigger, and they'll try to smear the entire black community by holding up one individual and demonizing them day and night and saying the black community has a problem. It's the same strategy that they ran with Bill Cosby. The black community has a rape culture problem, and it's all these black men. Kanye West says something, and they say the black community has an anti-Semitism problem because Kanye West. No, the white media has an anti-black racism problem. And if one bipolar rapper defines the black community, then does Donald Sterling define his? If the one is true, then so is the other. The lesson here is never let anyone else define you, especially when they don't have your best interest at heart. All this phony outrage over an Amazon link, these are the lengths they'll go to, this is how far they'll stretch to push the lie that, well, black people, they're as racist as anybody else. Because that's the real point here. Keep the lie alive. So we can put that black community as anti-Semitic junk to rest. The only clowns who claim that are anti-black racist. And unlike with Kyrie Irving or even Kanye West, we can present an actual record of people who have gotten rich and powerful off of attacking and denigrating us. And none, not even one of the hypocrites you see today like Ari Emanuel or these other liars in the white media who are pretending to be outraged, had a word to say about any of those anti-black racists. They remain completely quiet. And I think we all know why. Because in their case, silence gives consent. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Michael Somners, Moshe Ben Abraham, Aisha Sarpong, Tariq, and Nigel Davis. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.